Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Lucinda, Rouse.
And I'm Dami Adewale. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debates about the important goings-on in the charity world. Today we'll be asking how charities can become data mature and why this is important to inform programming and help demonstrate the success of their work to current and potential supporters.
Our guest is Sarah Derbyshire, Chief Executive of Orchestras Live, a charity that exists to ensure everyone has access to and can enjoy the benefits of live orchestral music, regardless of their background. The charity has also launched an income-generating tool that supports other organisations with their impact and evaluation services. It's called the Social Value Engine, and we'll hear more about that later. Sarah, hello. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
But as a first question, why is data so important to voluntary organisations?
Well, I think it really has to be our first port of call for demonstrating that we are actually doing what it says on the tin. We're making all sorts of claims to our funders, to our supporters, to our volunteers. We know that they're true, but how do they know that they're true? So data really is the tool to enable you, after a little bit of heart graft in the beginning, to very simply tell your story. And we all know in the charity world, telling the story is really what it's all about.
Sarah, I wanted to talk about the challenge of collecting data and not knowing what to do with it. Why is this a common occurrence for charities, and what is Orchestras Live's experience of it?
I'll start with how we grew into it because I think it illustrates quite well. So I joined the organisation about 10 years ago. And at that point, actually, they were relatively data savvy for that time, and certainly in the cultural sector. So we had a dashboard, for example, which at the time I thought, oh, that's quite up there. And we'd been helped to produce that by one of our trustees who worked for EY. The trouble was that what we were measuring was set by the success targets. It wasn't actually measuring what we did and who we impacted. So whilst it gave you lots of numbers, it didn't give you much of a story behind the numbers. The other problem was that we had an awful lot of data. We were collecting data for the dashboard that the board of trustees saw. We were collecting data from our partners, which we needed for our own financial purposes. We were collecting data for funders. One of our major funders is Arts Council England, and they require a lot of data, which they need for their own purposes to report to government. But we don't necessarily need that information. So I asked a colleague if they could put together a flowchart that showed all the data that we were collecting, what we did with it, and where it went. And honestly, you could barely see white paper underneath this diagram. It was so full of information. And I realised this is why we're not actually making use of the data. So I think our problem was partly that we were dictated by other people, rather than thinking, what do we want to collect ourselves? What is going to give us the information that we need? So we were still asking ourselves questions in meetings, but we weren't actually doing anything about finding that information. I think another problem for us is that we reach a whole range of different beneficiaries. We're quite a complex organisation in the way that we work. So there isn't one single stream of data that will take you to the answer. You have to kind of navigate quite a lot, and it takes a bit of thought in the beginning to sort out what is the information that you need and what are you going to put to one side.
I wonder if you could give us a little bit of background to your organisational structure. How many people do you employ at Orchestras Live? And when you came in at that point of seeing this is looking a little bit out of control on the data front, who was responsible for that data collection, gathering and dissemination effort?
When I joined, there were 7 in the organisation. We're now 15. There wasn't a designated person responsible for gathering and sorting and storing and managing data. Our data was collected really through the 2 people who were most closely involved in the financial side. And the development of the dashboard we'd been assisted by some pro bono help in putting that together. So there was nobody really dedicated. Equally, we were not sharing the data across the team. And I think that's another thing, that you can easily end up with somebody who's burrowing away into all the numbers, but is that involving the whole team? So people might be feeding that in, but are they getting anything back out of it? And that was another thing that came up when we did the data maturity survey.
So you said that soon after you joined, a data maturity survey was conducted. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. We found something called the Data Orchard Maturity Tool, and it involved asking our whole team and trustees about their experience of data in the organisation. So did they collect data? Who did they pass that on to? Did they know where it was stored? Did they ever use it themselves for anything? Did they feel that we could be using data differently? And absolutely everybody took part. It was very revealing. There were quite a lot of people who, quite understandably, this is not a criticism, it's because of the way that we were running it, didn't really know what data is. And so there was a kind of quite a misconception about the difference between numbers and hard data and soft data in terms of the qualitative information that we were gathering from participants, for example, in our projects. Staff talked a lot about inputting data, but they didn't talk about what they did with the outputs or even how that was presented to them in a way that they could use it usefully. And for me, it confirmed that there was not any kind of culture of using data for planning. So we weren't using it to improve our own activities, make things more efficient for ourselves and our partners. We weren't using it really to report as effectively as we could to funders and potential funders.
You just spoke there about the lack of use of data for planning. So could you just speak a bit more about some of the biggest changes you've made in the organisation post-audit to how you approach data collection and how you make use of the data you gather?
One of the biggest changes is that we now have staff who are dedicated to the management and analysis of data. We haven't had to create a post. We've more modified a post to kind of encompass the new thinking. So the biggest change probably for us is the change in culture. I think lots of charities will recognise that a few years ago, and even now to some extent, at some point in project planning, someone will say, what about evaluation? And everybody kind of goes, oh yeah, right, evaluation. And suddenly you discover actually you took the budget out for evaluation because you had to make the money add up at the bottom line. So you haven't even got any money to pay for it. So that has really changed for us. And it is because we use data in a way that helps us. It helps us the way we discuss projects with each other. It helps us internally. We know that we are looking at data in a way that helps us improve what we're doing. It helps us understand the experience of our participants and of our partners. It certainly helps with funding development and fundraising. And it does help the story. It helps us, our comms team as well, to tell the overall story. So we've modified a couple of roles, and we now have a production data and insight analyst, and we also have a data and finance assistant. And we've also introduced reflections meetings where we look in a broad sense at the results of the data that we're collecting and think about what are the questions that that's posing for us. So I think quite an important thing for us is that we don't now expect data to demonstrate success. That, I think, is where the eye rolling around evaluation comes in. I think we look at data to help inform us about what the next steps should be. And we've also used that in a way that helps us focus our own limited resources. So if we can see that we can spend money somewhere where it will have greater impact because of the data, we're able to do that.
And you mentioned these two roles that have been modified to include quite substantially data responsibilities. But what about the broader team? How have you made data everyone's business, if indeed you have? And how have you managed to achieve that when you've had people who previously didn't even know what data was?
Yeah. I think, first of all, the fact that everybody was involved in that first data maturity audit, and we fed back on that, and we asked people for their own views about what could be improved. I think the way that we do involve everybody in the team in looking at those results, that is key, because if they feel it's benefiting their own role and their own delivery and performance, then it's of interest to them to do it.
And in terms of how the data is stored and shared and viewed and used, you mentioned that you previously had a platform that was developed on a pro bono basis.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have now?
It looks quite similar. It's still generated through a spreadsheet, actually. We're looking at how we link our CRM system to that. So the latest step in our journey is another review of all our systems and processes, looking at where are we storing the data? Could we do it more efficiently? Because once you double in size and you've got more people inputting, I think it's really important that you don't just grow like Topsy, you and organically. You have to stop and review and think, is this the best use of our time? And also we get feedback from partners, and we understand from them that there are things that they're giving us data about that they're not always sure why they're doing that. So it's a constant process, really, of checking in and making sure that everybody involved is given clear information and has a clear understanding.
And through the information you've gathered, you've introduced something called the social value engine.
Yeah.
Could you just tell us a bit more about that and how you've turned it into sort of an income generating product?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really been, a completely unexpected outcome. I guess that our own improved understanding of data enabled us to seize the opportunity when it came. So I think I mentioned we'd already begun with quite a basic relative return on investment model that showed us where projects where we were putting in most money and most time, most staff capacity, how were they performing, and would we be better off investing our money in a different kind of a project, for example. Then one of our partners, East Riding of Yorkshire Council, told us about a tool that they had developed with an independent developer called Rouse Regeneration, called the Social Value Engine. And the council had developed it to be able to measure the social value of the services that they were providing. And it works on the principle of a social return on investment, not a financial return on investment. And that puts a monetary value on the social, environmental, and economic outcomes of whatever activity. So our partner suggested that we try this tool on a community-focused music activity. And it had never been used on a cultural program of any kind before. And we thought, well, yeah, let's try it, because it would be really interesting apart from anything else. Now, the first thing is that orchestras are expensive. So we were not assuming that we would get a wonderful result from this. In fact, we were slightly nervous. But the very first running of that tool on that project, we showed that for every £1 spent on the project, we had a social return of £8.73. So that is quite substantial, actually. If you go much above £10, apparently everybody thinks you're overclaiming, so that's not good. And if you go kind of under 5, you want to understand why. And the other thing about the social value engine is that it uses the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So you're measuring your activity and the data that you're collecting, which includes qualitative data, against specific UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it's really helpful to have something that is a universally understood measure. It's not distinct to your own sector. It covers all sectors, and people in all walks of life understand it. So your sponsors will understand it, your funders will understand it, media understands it. It's a very quick way of conveying the impact of what you've been doing. So that rather kind of resonated for me, because I've been talking for a long time about how I feel we, especially in the cultural sector, have to find a way that demonstrates our impact beyond the bottom line, because the bottom line isn't really what we're about. We're about artistic product impacting people's lives. And that's a very difficult thing to quantify. So something that actually talks about social value seemed to me a really valuable tool, and something that not just Orchestras Live, but other people could benefit from. However, it does take a bit of getting your head round the engine itself. So you do have to think really hard about what data. I mean, it does take you back to the beginning of this conversation. What data are you collecting? What questions are you asking, and why are you asking them? And have you got something that you're going to be able to measure that against? And so that requires quite a bit of assistance, which we were very fortunate in having from the team at East Riding. But we could see that other organisations wouldn't find that quite so easy. And so that's why we incorporated it into our impact and evaluation services as a tool that people can work on with our assistance.
So is this done in partnership with the council still, or have you taken over the whole service delivery?
It's done in partnership with Social Value Engine Limited, and we have a license agreement with them. And then we have a particular arrangement that enables us to work with different clients on that.
And this is now an income generating activity?
It is, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a slow start, which we always knew it would be, because things don't rocket away overnight unless you're on Artemis 2, whatever it was. But I think the other thing is that there's a bit of an education that needs to be done in the sector as to why this could work for people and why it's worth that initial effort to begin to get those results.
Could you just talk about the importance of having data-savvy trustees and a board that takes a productive approach to data collection, considering all the changes that you've made?
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned our original dashboard came about because we had a very helpful trustee who supported that. We also, in our early, possibly over-collection of data, but nevertheless, we had somebody from the education system on our board, and he was really helpful in assisting us in thinking about the things that we wanted to measure internally. We then had somebody from the world of finance who actually was really helpful in just developing our thinking about that relative return on investment. So I think trustees have been really important on the journey. I think everybody has to be prepared for an idea not to work first time round, because they might be coming from one world and we're sitting in another world, and we're going to have to find something in the middle that we each see the point of, and the systems will be slightly different. But all of those trustees that I've mentioned were absolutely prepared to get stuck in and help us find those answers. So that was really helpful, because there came a point when I was saying to the board, I think you're asking too many questions of us and we're going to have to streamline things. Now, it's really helpful to have 2 or 3 trustees backing you up on that and able to say, actually, if we do it this way, it's going to work better. So that was really good. I always think that with a small team, you want your board to bring expertise that you don't have on the team. And we most certainly did not have data expertise on the team. So that's been fantastic. And we continue to have data knowledge and data awareness as one of the things that we look for when we're recruiting for new trustees.
How about the cost of your data maturity journey? Thinking about from that point where there was an understanding that things needed to change a little bit on the data side of things to where you are now with a new system, a new product that you have indeed monetized. But what have the expensive things been in all of that?
Well, I suppose in one way you would probably say staff. I don't think of that as an expense, because I feel that that's investment in our organisation and in those people and in our expertise. And I think the payoffs have been greater than the cost. So I do think that in our sector, we are seen as having a high level of expertise in using data. That can only be helpful when it comes to dealing with the Arts Council, for example. It's also certainly helped with our fundraising. We're able to tell the story better and we're able to demonstrate our impact much better. So I think in the long run, it has paid off. We did get a return on the investment.
Yes. But so it's mainly staff as opposed to systems or the need to be conducting more surveys that have costs attached to them.
Yes, yeah.
Any challenges associated with this journey?
I think the internal culture is always a challenge, and making sure that you're staging things appropriately and you're listening to what people say. So actually the systems and processes audit that we're currently going through came about really because we asked a couple of questions about data in a staff survey, and it was clear that actually we needed to do a bit of housekeeping. So I think that's important, making sure that you do listen to what people are telling you about their own experience of data.
There is obviously a difference between numbers, the quantitative data, and then the more qualitative storytelling side of things. How do you approach that in your data collection and processing efforts?
It's a really good question, because I think a lot of people jump into thinking data is all about numbers. But for us, it's really important that we keep qualitative data in the mix. And we are really all about the experience that our participants and partners have and how they value that. And it's really important for social value, of course, because they are telling you what their experience has been and what impact it's had on them personally. So I think the key difference is that it's a much more personal approach.
Do you have any kind of top tips for charities seeking to become more data mature?
I think that's starting with the why, asking why you're asking the question, making sure that you know why you're asking them before you start collecting the data. I think it's really important that everybody is involved. So that business of involving both trustees and your staff team, but really important to keep feeding back to people why they're collecting what they are collecting. And it doesn't just disappear into a kind of black hole in the reporting team's area and never resurfaces. For us, using the data maturity audit was really helpful because it questioned some of our assumptions and it showed up where the gaps were. So that was really, really helpful. I think without that, it would have taken us much longer to do the streamlining. Having built the data roles into our structure has been really important. Data is absolutely central to everything, nearly every conversation that we have as a team. Don't underestimate the soft data. That point about the qualitative data is really important. Don't get sort of sidetracked by the numbers because it won't tell you absolutely everything. And I think in our world, it's not just numbers. It really, really is experience and that social and personal impact that the work has on people. Do get trustees involved because they can help you and they won't cost you money. And I think getting that data strategy into the business plan as well, because that knits it in and it means that you're able to directly feed back into how you're performing against your business plan. That has been very, very useful for us.
And at the most basic level, a charity chief executive listening to this perhaps doesn't have the expertise on the trustee board that you say would be extremely valuable, but would like to make the first steps towards conducting a data maturity audit. Where do they go?
Well, they could go to Data Orchard, which is the outfit that we went to. I don't know that there are very many others that offer that service, but that certainly worked for us. I think if they're thinking about recruiting trustees with data experience, there are more organisations that are linking charities to trustees that have business skills. There's something called RIAC, RIAC, and they are linking people from the business world with charities. I think might particularly be arts and culture charities, but they would be worth talking to. And just, in terms of open recruiting, adding data and analysis into the skills that you're looking for, you may find that there's somebody who would have thought, I didn't think I could be all that useful to a charity, but actually I could do that. So you could find somebody that way, definitely.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing those tips and for telling us all about Orchestras Live's data maturity journey.
Well, it's been great to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Sarah, and that's it for this episode. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. And remember, you can always let us know what you'd like to hear more or less of on this podcast through our listener survey. You can find the link to the survey in the show notes to this and every episode. Our producers today are Inga Marsden and Jude Owen.